Imagine nearly choking on my morning coffee as I stared at the notice. My HOA fees had skyrocketed to $1,950 a month. As if on cue, I glanced out the window just in time to see Lisa, the HOA board president, cruising down the street in a brand-new Mercedes-Benz G-Class, a luxury ride clearly funded by our money. But what these corrupt HOA tyrants didn't realize was that I wasn't just another homeowner. I was a retired auditor, and I knew exactly how to follow the money. The deeper I dug, the more disturbing the truth became. Tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled into shady maintenance contracts, mysterious expenses with no real services rendered, and a financial black hole swallowing our community funds. The question now isn't if I can take them down, but how much evidence I need before I bring their entire scheme crashing down. Stay tuned, subscribe, and comment below, because this fight is only getting started. I had lived in Willow Creek condominiums, a quiet suburban complex just outside Phoenix, Arizona, for over 12 years. It was the kind of place where neighbors borrowed sugar from each other, kids played basketball in the driveways, and retirees enjoyed slow mornings on their porches. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. That morning, as I stepped onto my patio with a steaming cup of coffee, I spotted Lisa Hoa, the head of our homeowners association, stepping out of a brand-new Mercedes-Benz G-Class. Just last month, she had been driving an old Honda Civic. Something about the change didn't sit right with me. I walked down to my mailbox, pulled out a thick white envelope, and tore it open. HOA fee increase notice. My stomach dropped. The monthly maintenance fee was skyrocketing from $650 to $1,950, a 200% increase. There was no clear explanation, just a vague statement about necessary property enhancements and a firm warning at the bottom. Failure to comply will result in financial penalties and potential property liens. I felt a slow burn rising in my chest. I knocked on my neighbor Mary Ann Foster's door. She was in her early 70s, had lived here longer than anyone, and was practically the neighborhood historian. When she opened the door, I barely had to say a word. Her eyes were already red, the letter clutched in her frail hands. "I can't afford this," she whispered. "If they make me pay that much, I'll have to sell." Mary Ann wasn't the only one. At least a dozen neighbors stood outside holding identical letters. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others were already on the phone with their banks. Something was wrong. That night, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. Before I retired, I was an accountant, and I knew a thing or two about financial records. I logged into our HOA portal and started combing through the financial statements. It didn't take long to find the first red flag. $89,000 for landscape improvements, paid to Desert Bloom Landscaping. I'd never seen a landscaping crew set foot in this complex. The bushes were overgrown, the trees hadn't been trimmed in years, and the common area was filled with weeds. Then I found another one. $32,000 for a new security system. The cameras we had were ancient, grainy things that barely worked at night. But the biggest discovery came when I saw a $275,000 transaction to HOA Property Services. I clicked on the company's registration details. It was owned by Lisa Hoa, the HOA president. I leaned back in my chair. She had been awarding contracts to her own company, overcharging us, and pocketing the money. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I headed toward the maintenance shed, where I found Tom Reynolds, our longtime maintenance worker. He was sitting on an old wooden bench wiping his forehead. I sat down beside him. "Tom, have you seen any new contractors around here?" He shook his head, chuckling bitterly. "New contractors? They cut my hours last month, said they were bringing in a new team, but I haven't seen a single one of them." I asked if he had his most recent pay stubs. He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. His pay had been cut by 40%, yet the HOA was supposedly spending more than ever on maintenance. Lisa wasn't just scamming us. She was siphoning money out while cutting actual services. I clenched my fists. This wasn't just mismanagement. It was theft. And I was going to prove it. I spent the next few hours gathering every financial document I could find. I downloaded 6 months' worth of HOA expense reports and started cross-referencing them with local business records. Desert Bloom Landscaping? A fake company. No physical address, no website, no tax filings. Phoenix Security Solutions? Registered to Lisa's cousin, charging triple the standard rate for basic security patrols. And HOA Property Services? Well, that was the biggest joke of all, listed as a consulting firm that somehow billed us hundreds of thousands for community development plans that never existed. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. At 9 p.m., I received a text from Ryan Calloway, another neighbor who worked in real estate. "Did you see the new violation notice? They're fining me $1,000 for non-compliant mailbox placement. It's been in the same spot for 7 years." I checked my own door and saw a bright red notice stuck to it. Unauthorized flower pots, subject to $500 penalty. I turned around and scanned my small patio. My 2 potted plants had been there since the day I moved in. Lisa knew. She knew I was looking into her, and now she was trying to shut me up. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of a tow truck idling outside my window. I pulled the blinds apart just in time to see my neighbor James Carter's car being hauled away. He came running out of his condo, barefoot, waving his arms. "What the hell are you doing? I have a parking permit." The tow truck driver barely glanced at him, just pointed at the sticker on his windshield. "Expired permit?" That was a lie. I'd seen James renew his permit just last month. His car was parked in his assigned spot, same as always. The only thing that had changed was that James had been one of the first people to speak out against the HOA fee increase. I grabbed my phone and snapped a few pictures as evidence. Then I checked my own driveway. My car was still there, but for how long? I wouldn't put it past Lisa Hoa to make an example out of me next. I needed more proof, something bigger than just inflated invoices and fake fines. Lisa had to be breaking state laws somewhere, and I was going to find out how. I drove down to the Maricopa County Clerk's office where property records were stored. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but after working as an accountant for decades, I had a gut feeling that something would show up. I requested the financial filings for Willow Creek HOA and spent the next 3 hours digging through pages of tax forms, expense reports, and contract agreements. Then I found it, a $125,000 payment labeled Emergency Roofing Repairs, paid to Sunset Development LLC. That name rang a bell. I pulled up my laptop and did a quick search. Sunset Development LLC was registered to Lisa's husband, Derek Hoa. That was it. She wasn't just awarding fake contracts to herself, she was funneling money directly to her family. I printed out the records, shoved them into my briefcase, and headed home. But before I even made it to my door, I saw 3 violation notices taped to my garage. Weeds exceeding allowable height, fine, $500. Exterior paint fading, fine, $1,200. Unapproved security camera, fine, $2,000. I chuckled under my breath. They were getting desperate. They wanted to intimidate me, but they had no idea who they were messing with. That evening, I called Marianne, James, and Ryan over to my place and laid out the documents in front of them. "Lisa and her husband are laundering money through fake construction contracts," I said, pointing to the tax filings. "She's been overcharging us, cutting real maintenance and pocketing the difference." Ryan whistled. "That's straight-up embezzlement." Marianne leaned closer, adjusting her reading glasses. "So, what do we do now?" I hesitated for a moment, then exhaled. "We bring it to the Arizona Department of Housing and make sure the media gets a copy, too." Ryan grinned. "I might have a connection at the Phoenix Tribune. They love a good HOA scandal." I nodded. "Good, because we're about to blow this wide open." The next morning, I emailed every document I had collected to the State Housing Board, along with a formal complaint against Willow Creek HOA and Lisa Hoa. Then I sent the same file to 3 different reporters in the area. I didn't sign my name. It didn't matter. The evidence spoke for itself. By lunchtime, Lisa had already figured out something was wrong. I saw her pacing outside the HOA office, her phone pressed to her ear, her usual smug expression replaced by something that looked a lot like panic. I knew it wouldn't take long for word to spread. And I was right. That afternoon, the first news article appeared online. HOA president accused of misusing homeowner funds in shocking new investigation. The HOA board must have seen it too, because by the end of the day, all of us who had spoken out, me, Ryan, James, Marianne, and a handful of others, received letters demanding immediate payment of thousands of dollars in fines. That's when I knew Lisa was making her last move. That night, just before midnight, my security camera sent me an alert. I checked the live feed on my phone and saw 2 figures standing in my driveway. One of them was Sarah Chang, Lisa's assistant on the HOA board. She was measuring the distance between my trash cans and the curb while muttering something to the guy next to her. I zoomed in. The man was Tony Diaz, the owner of the towing company that had taken James's car that morning. They were planning to tow my car next. I hit record on my security feed, knowing that by tomorrow I'd have all the proof I needed to finish what I started. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I woke up to an inbox full of emails. One was from a state investigator. They were launching a formal audit into the HOA's financials. Another was from a journalist at the Phoenix Tribune, asking if I'd be willing to do an anonymous interview. And the third was from a private email address with no name attached. You need to stop, or else. I stared at the screen, then checked my phone's security app. The footage from last night was still there. Sarah and Tony sneaking around my property, whispering, measuring, and taking pictures. I wasn't scared. I was angry. These people thought they could bully us, steal from us, and get away with it. But they had just made a big mistake. I called James and Ryan, telling them to meet me at Marianne's place in an hour. When we got there, she already had coffee ready and was sitting at her dining table, flipping through a stack of old HOA meeting minutes. "Look at this," she said, sliding one across the table. "Last year, they voted to approve a community center renovation for $400,000. But have you seen any renovations?" Ryan shook his head. "That money never went anywhere." James sighed, rubbing his temples. "This is bigger than just a couple of fake contracts. They've been siphoning money for years." I tapped the table, bringing their attention back. "And that's why we're going to the next HOA meeting. We're bringing copies of everything. We're making this public." Marianne pursed her lips. "Lisa's not going to just let that happen." I nodded. "I know, but this time, we're not backing down." That evening, I sent another email, this time to every homeowner in the complex. "Attend the next HOA meeting. You need to see this." Attached were the files, the fraudulent contracts, the fake maintenance charges, and proof that Lisa and her husband had been funneling money into their personal accounts. Within an hour, the email chain was on fire. People who had been quiet before were suddenly responding, sharing their own stories. They fined me $800 for leaving my recycling bin out for an extra hour. They rejected my request to fix my leaking roof, said there were no funds available. I was threatened with foreclosure when I questioned the budget last year. The next morning, I walked past Lisa's office and saw her standing at her desk, arms crossed, glaring at her laptop. I could guess what she was looking at. She had just realized her house of cards was about to collapse. I smiled, because in 3 days we had an HOA meeting, and she had nowhere left to hide. The night of the HOA meeting, the community center parking lot was packed. I had never seen so many residents show up before. People who had never attended a single meeting were now crammed into every available seat, some standing along the walls, whispering among themselves. The air buzzed with tension. I spotted Lisa Hoa at the front of the room, seated at the long oak table beside her fellow board members, her expression frozen in that forced, politician-like smile. She tapped her manicured nails against the table, checking her phone repeatedly. She knew what was coming, but she was still pretending to have everything under control. The meeting started as usual, with the routine announcements and an obviously fake discussion about exciting new community initiatives. Then came the moment of reckoning. Lisa cleared her throat and smoothed her blazer. As you all know, we've recently made necessary adjustments to our budget to maintain the quality of life here at Willow Creek. A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back scoffed. Ryan, seated next to me, leaned over. "This is it. Time to bring the hammer down." I stood up. The room quieted. All eyes turned toward me. Lisa's smile faltered for the first time. "Before we move on," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I think the residents deserve to see exactly where their money has been going." I pulled a folder from my bag, walked to the front of the room, and connected my laptop to the projector. The screen behind Lisa lit up with the first document. A $275,000 transaction to Hoa Property Services. I clicked to the next slide. Sunset Development, LLC. $125,000 roofing repairs paid to Lisa's husband. Then the next. $400,000 for a non-existent community center renovation. Gasps filled the room. People whispered angrily. Lisa's face turned pale. "I've spent the last few weeks investigating the financial records of Willow Creek HOA," I continued. "These aren't just overcharges. This is fraud. Lisa Hoa and her board have been funneling HOA funds into their own pockets for years. They've been fining homeowners for non-existent violations while giving themselves massive payouts through fake contracts." Lisa shot up from her chair, slamming her hand on the table. "That's enough," she snapped, her voice shaking. "You have no proof that any of this is illegal. We run this HOA by the book." But I was already clicking to the next slide. Security camera footage from my driveway played on the screen, showing Lisa's assistant, Sarah Chang, and a tow truck operator sneaking around my property, measuring my trash cans, whispering, taking pictures. Then, footage from James Carter's house, the moment his legally parked car was towed in broad daylight. Lisa's face hardened. "This is harassment," she spat. "You think you can just accuse me of crimes in front of everyone? You're nothing but a troublemaker." She turned to the board members beside her. "Are we really going to let one disgruntled homeowner hijack this meeting?" But the board members didn't look at her. They were staring at the screen, at the undeniable proof in front of them. From the back of the room, Mary Ann Foster stood up, clutching a stack of papers. "Then explain this, Lisa." She walked forward, her voice loud and clear. "I've lived here for 25 years, and I've never seen a community center renovation. I've never seen new landscaping work, even though we've paid nearly $1 million for it. Where did that money go?" More voices joined in. "I got fined for a fence that's been standing since the 90s, someone yelled. "They threatened to foreclose on me for questioning the budget," another voice added. The room erupted. Lisa's hands clenched into fists. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "You're all just a bunch of ungrateful—" But she never finished her sentence. A man in a suit walked into the room, flashing a badge. "Stephen Martinez, Arizona Department of Housing. We received multiple complaints about financial misconduct in Willow Creek, and, after reviewing the documents sent to us, we're launching a formal investigation." Lisa stepped back, her mouth opening and closing. I don't understand," she stammered. I crossed my arms. "You do understand, Lisa. And so does everyone in this room." Martinez continued. "Mrs. Hoa, we've already subpoenaed your financial records. We have evidence of embezzlement, fraudulent contracts, and illegal fines imposed on homeowners under false pretenses. You and your board members will be required to cooperate with our investigation." Lisa's composure crumbled. Her face turned red with fury. "This is a witch hunt," she shrieked. "I built this community. I made it better. You can't do this to me." But no one was listening anymore. 2 police officers entered the room. One of them approached Lisa. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us for questioning." Lisa turned to her board members. "Say something," she demanded. But they all looked away. Sarah Chang, the assistant who had been helping her with the fake fines, was already backing toward the door. Lisa realized then that she was alone. She grabbed her purse and tried to push past the officers, but they stopped her. "You have no right," she screamed. Martinez raised an eyebrow. "We have every right. You stole nearly $2 million from the residents of this community." A stunned silence fell over the room. $2 million. People looked at each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. Lisa's lips quivered. "You don't know who I am," she whispered. "I have connections. This will never stick." I stepped forward, looking her in the eyes. "We'll see about that." As the officers led her away, the tension in the room slowly lifted. People started whispering, some clapping. James Carter let out a breath. "Holy hell," he muttered. "Did that really just happen?" Ryan patted my shoulder. "You did it, man. You really did it." Marianne wiped her eyes. We all did. The next week was a blur. News crews showed up. The Phoenix Tribune ran an expose on the scandal. The state board took over control of the HOA, freezing all accounts while a forensic audit was conducted. Lisa and her husband were charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. Sarah Chang tried to cut a deal by testifying against them. The rest of the HOA board resigned in disgrace. And for the first time in years, the people of Willow Creek felt like they had taken back their community. 3 months later, we held an election for a new HOA board. Marianne Foster was voted in as president. One of her first acts? Cutting our HOA fees back down to $650. She also set up an independent audit system to prevent future corruption. Transparency reports were posted online for all homeowners to see. On a warm spring afternoon, I sat on my porch, watching kids ride their bikes down the street, hearing neighbors chatting happily again. James walked over, handing me a beer. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he said. I nodded. "Yeah, feels like home again." Marianne joined us, smiling as she glanced at the street where city workers were finally repairing the potholes that had been ignored for years. "You know," she said, "we couldn't have done it without you." I chuckled. "We couldn't have done it without all of us." As we toasted to a new beginning, I glanced toward the empty HOA office across the street, now stripped of Lisa's reign. She thought she owned this place. She thought she could get away with it. But she underestimated the people who lived here, and she learned the hard way that when you mess with the community fights back.